Hello everybody and welcome back to the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Chris Sutcliffe and this is the latest in a series of sessions from our Publisher Summits, which were held all the way back in June, which feels like a lifetime ago. Now this episode features a fantastic panel where the Economist Andrew Palmer and Dominic Rech and the Financial Times Sarah Ebner joined Press Gazette's Charlotte Tobitt to discuss personality-powered newsletters, the good and the bad. Now I've also written up the highlights from this episode in an article which is live on voices.media or straight into your inbox if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Now before we get cracking, we would be remiss and also in breach of contract not to thank our sponsors for the Publisher Newsletter Summit, Percendo and Sino. You can find out more about them and how they help publishers take their newsletters to the next level at publishersummits.com. But let's get straight into it. Take it away, Charlotte.
Thank you, all three of people on the stage, for joining us. I'm going to start with The Economist, actually, if you don't mind. Dominic, okay. You're perfect. So basically, as Charlotte and Esther very well set up, this is all about personality-led newsletters. The Economist kind of is very well known for not having bylines or not pinning its journalists front and centre for its articles. So can you just tell us kind of how you ended up with newsletters that could be defined as personality driven?
Sure thing. So first I'll point out that personality has actually become a big part of the Economist newsletter strategy. We've actually been doing it for quite a few years. As we'll talk about, Andrew's just launched the Bartleby newsletter. But we have various newsletters. All of our newsletters, personality plays a huge part. Our Sunday newsletter, written by Adam Roberts, has been a big driver of personality for many years. And we also have subscriber-only newsletters like The War Room, written by Shashank Joshi, where personality is a key part of that newsletter, and it really is what makes that newsletter function. So personality has become a huge part for us. But there's a huge team that works behind these newsletters, editors, producers, designers, fact checkers. And together, we work together to make that base, whether it's Andrew's, whether it's Shashank's, as appealing as possible so readers feel like they can talk to them and reach them directly. And that's what we try to do with all of our newsletters, to be honest.
So, Andrew, do you want to tell us a bit about what you do and kind of what you did first and now how it's ended up in letter form?
Yeah, sure. Nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So I think I'm a dinosaur. I've been at The Economist for decades, brought up on sort of print journalism, no bylines, anonymity. So this is a new world that has slowly evolved. So I write a weekly column in print, which is on management and work. And columns allow you to have a bit more of your own personality than a standard Economist article or leader. Have a single style, which is pretty rigorously. So there's one voice. Columns give you a bit more leeway. So this is a bit of a natural progression in the sense that I'm already got a bit of a voice. Now there's just a face to go with it. But it's still quite a jump from where we were before. That sense of sort of being exposed, having ownership. I mean, I've never been called a personality before. So, this is all totally new. Podcast is interesting too as well. So that's obviously breaking down the veil necessarily and has been doing so for a while. So I'm also doing that. So it just feels like we're moving slowly, but not as fast as others, where you have individuals slightly more to the fore than they were.
And for you, you've alluded to it being a bit of a... Has it been disconcerting in any way, or have you... is there anything you don't like about it? Let's get straight into that.
I'm able to live a normal life, so it's fine. I guess the good side of it is more contact with readers. So people are emailing, getting in contact in various ways. That's already generating kind of its own momentum. So this newsletter is very young, but two of the only 5 weeks old, 6 weeks old. Two of them have been generated by specific reader queries. There's quite a lot of traffic, so that's actually really nice. That's great. Downsides, extra work. But that's about it.
Okay, great. And let's go to the FT for a minute. Sarah, can you just fill everyone in on kind of what your newsletter portfolio is like and kind of the mixture of them and how many of those might be this personality-led idea?
Yeah, I would say that the majority of our newsletters are so-called personality-led. I mean, we have some automated newsletters, I mentioned before, some headline newsletters that do well for traffic. But because we're a subscription business, we're always trying to add something that add value to some of these subscriptions. Something that's bespoke, exclusive, useful is what we're trying to do with our newsletters. So some of them are very much built around personalities, and some of them are written with somebody using less of their personality, but still never boring. I would say never boring. We have a reader survey that's very important to us, which hundreds of thousands of people have taken, and the top newsletters on that survey are always the ones that are very personality based. But when we say personality, I sometimes balk a little bit at that word, and I've started using voice more, because I think people start thinking that when you say personality, you mean it's going to be kind of really in your face. Our top newsletter for this year on our reader survey is called Chris Giles on Central Banks. And Chris is an incredibly intelligent guy who writes with real expertise and humour. And the comments we get on the survey say, it's insightful, it's analytic, it's useful, all the things you'd want to hear. Brilliant, people say. But he doesn't put himself front and centre. It's not about him. He doesn't talk about his life. He just talks about what he knows about. So it is personality driven, but it's not. It's more that he's got the expertise and the voice rather than and that, just to say, that newsletter for the last few months has had 100% 5 out of 5s on our survey. So, the readers really like it. They really want that. But we do have a lot of, we also look at other metrics before you ask. And it's not always the top newsletters by sort of things like open rate and click-through rate are not always the big personality ones. Hasten to say that Chris is very successful. And some of them are more, a roundup of what's been going on, which people find really useful. Someone was saying before, do we want a lot of editorializing at the top of a sort of daily roundup newsletter? I'd say probably not. Your readers just want you to tell them the news. So they want it written in a nice way, but they don't want you to go off and tell them things that are not useful. They just want to get to it. So we're careful. We have a portfolio that's balanced, I would say. We take a lot of notice of our reader survey. You were saying, Andrew, that you'd taken notice of people who'd written in. So do we, on the survey and via email, and we respond to those. So I say we have a good balance, I hope.
And then just on kind of how what works as well. Some of your subscribers, some of your newsletters are kind of individual subscriptions as well, aren't they? And does that play into? I'm thinking, for example, one that I kind of follow a bit is Stephen Bush's one. So interested in kind of the subscriptions angle there, but also kind of what you're saying about the voices. Stephen tends to put in kind of some music, film he's watched or something. So
Stephen's, I would definitely say, is a personality newsletter. And people really build up a relation. Successful, let's call them personality-driven newsletters. Successful ones, I think, are ones where people really build up a relationship with the writer. They feel that they know them. Whether they do or not is a separate thing, but they feel they know them. With Stephen, I think they probably do, because they've got used to his puns. They know the kind of music that he likes. We've got a Spotify playlist of all his choices that he puts in there. He talks about the films he goes to see and the books he reads, and people love those. They really, really engage with that part of the newsletter, which is the sort of end bit. But they also really like his political analysis, or they wouldn't read the newsletter. So, and when, of course, we did make a couple of our newsletters standalone, the two that we picked initially were the ones which were very big personalities. I would say Rob Armstrong and Stephen Bush are two of our very biggest personalities at the FT, and both brilliant. I mean, Rob, as some of you may know in this room, coined the taco trade theory at the beginning of May in his unhedged newsletter, and that, President Trump's been complaining about that. So, but that's because he's funny and clever. He could come up with that. Stands for Trump always chickens out, by the way, for people who don't know. And yeah, you can buy those as standalones.
Nice. And then should we just go to The Economist? Kind of what metrics do you look at and how do they compare across some of your different newsletters?
Sarah kind of went over them briefly, but we obviously follow, we look at things like click-through rate. We still look to some degree at things like open rate. But I'd say something that really drives what we're doing at the moment and has been mentioned previously is that sort of community-driven dynamic. We put in so much effort and attention to individual subscribers' requests. Andrew's been doing that a lot since he launched Bartleby. But a good example, the War Room, which I mentioned, but Simply Science as well, our science-based newsletter, and Off the Charts. We spend a lot of time hearing what subscribers are writing to us, responding to them as well as we can and making them feel heard and making them feel valued. And often we will request whether we can potentially feature them in the newsletter. So things like that, we're really focused on making sure people feel part of the newsletter. You know, a good example in Simply Science recently was at the start of the year, we got our science correspondents, including Alok Jha, to reach out on a weekly basis, send in your best reader questions, and then we did a specific ask us anything, where individual subscribers were then felt part of the narrative. And we had so many people reach out afterwards and say how they felt in that dynamic. We also had one example where we have the 1945 archive, which is sort of looking back at how The Economist covered the end of the Second World War. And we did a special edition of the War Room on that. And one subscriber wrote in to ask whether he could see the cover during his birth week. We sent that to him. And this was serious fanfare, but he made that his screensaver. So it's like it's building those relationships directly with subscribers that beyond the how much is the mailbox growing, how much click-through have we got? We're really keen to see that subscribers are happy and engaging directly with us.
Yeah, nice. And Andrew, you kind of alluded to that before, but can you elaborate a bit more about what's different in terms of doing a newsletter versus and communicating with your audience?
Well, I mean, a column is basically just broadcast, right? You sort of send it out, not much comes back. You might get reader letters to the editor, which then find their way. So there's a little bit of that, but it doesn't feel quite as immediate or quite as personal. Bail is there. The column is called Bartleby, so it's like no one, in theory, people don't know who I am. Now they do, and although they write into a kind of a generic newsletter address, some will write now directly to me. Some, but it's always meant for me. So it's just I write on management of the workplace. So a lot of what's coming back is quite specific stuff which we all have as sources of frustration. So week 2 was, please tell me, how do I manage my email inbox? It's a sort of agony aunt kind of feel to it, and wrote the next newsletter on that, and then you have everyone is coming back the next week with their own tips on how to do it. So then you feature that. So there's just a sort of dynamic which simply wouldn't exist in the column. It has to be its own self-contained thing, and then you move on. And I guess the other thing is there is room in the newsletter, partly because it's much shorter, to kind of take a half-formed thought that wouldn't quite make a full column and play around with it a bit rather than it just being lost. So those two.
And just on what Sarah, one more for Andrew, just on kind of what Sarah said about it being voice versus personality, do you see it? How do you see that? For example, like, are you thinking this is an opportunity to add more opinion in, or is it more just about writing in a slightly different way?
I mean, it's not that different. So the column is already pretty opinionated. The voice is pretty developed. So I'm not writing very differently. I'll be using, I might use an I, which you'd never use in The Economist. So it's more that, and it might be a little more informal and obviously featuring letters. So there is a difference, but the voice is not different. I'm not sort of amping up something artificially because it's a newsletter format. Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
I was going to ask Sarah. So on because I'm looking at these inboxes, and then at the moment, sort of dipping in and out, replying. On your big personality-led ones, are people doing that routinely? How do you kind of maintain the idea of like, we will look and respond to your input without getting individual correspondents to reply to everything?
So when I started out doing this, I would say many fewer people did respond. And ever since I've been in this world of dealing directly with audiences, I've always thought you should reply. So I spent many, many times replying myself. I know that, for example, Stephen gets so many emails every single day. He cannot reply to them all. So I found that interesting. I know he does reply to some, and he certainly replied to more at the beginning because there were fewer of them. But I think the readers are very aware of that, interestingly, because quite often something will then appear in the newsletter, like you've said, so they'll know they've been listened to. There's a sense that they've been listened to. And I think they have also realized he can't. I think because they have it's that relationship of you thinking you know the writer. They also understand that they can't spend their whole life replying to emails. So if it's some kind of technical thing, then someone else on the team will often reply. You know, if they say I've signed up for Inside Politics and I'm not getting it, we'll reply. We wouldn't expect him to be doing that. But I think they just accept that they want you to read their email and they don't feel desperate for a reply. I have to say, I think people do love a reply. I do a newsletter called One Must Read, which is one article a day and just a paragraph. And sometimes I get emails from people saying, well, this article was rubbish. I hated it. You know, why did you run it? And I always reply. And then very often I'll get a reply saying, oh my God, I'm sure the next one will be fine. Thank you so much for replying. I really appreciate it. And I think that subscriber, they really appreciate that. But it doesn't take me long, and it doesn't bother me to do. But I wouldn't start thinking you have to reply to everything, so it'll drive you insane. But I think some of them, it's just a really nice thing to do. You'll be able to tell by the emails you get. So that would be my advice there. I would also say we did a similar thing when you were saying about we answered people's questions around in our First America's newsletter around the election, and the readers really liked that. They sent in questions and we spoke to the relevant reporters. So if it was about tech, we spoke to the tech reporter, and we did a really nice extra newsletter sent to the weekend, and they really liked it. So I think there's other ways to bring your readers in with all these. There is personality, but there's other things as well. That's on a newsletter where I mentioned it's not particularly a big personality newsletter, but they appreciate it the time you spend. And actually, when that guy who wrote that newsletter went on holiday, when he came back, people messaged and said, "Oh, glad to see you back." So even on that kind of newsletter, people do build up a relationship if you're in their inbox every day.
Yeah, I must say, on our Press Gazette newsletter, little plug, is mostly every day. It's very clearly Dominic Ponsford, our editor-in-chief, has got his little picture at the top, and it's kind of quite a long thing and he can be a bit more, not fully opinionated, but kind of add a lot more analysis than you would in our straight news stories. And I think people do notice when he's not there. So yeah, just there's my one little plug. But just to kind of allude back to something that was mentioned in the last session, is to what extent do kind of any of your writers need that profile before you build a newsletter where kind of their name and person is front and center, probably for each of you?
I can answer that. I think sort of a lot of the strategy, and we've spoken about personality and how important it is. I think at The Economist, we also try to find the right balance with that. Like, for example, the War Room is called the War Room. It's not called Shashank Joshi's newsletter. Although we might experiment with his name on the sender profile, say Shashank Joshi at The Economist, we won't. We try to find the right balance whenever we're trying to do this because we want to showcase what The Economist can offer, but also the personality, and trying to blend the personality correctly with what type of newsletter we're offering. We've got 23 newsletters now. So in terms of finding the right approach to personality, it's about making sure the best of that content is shown by the right person with the right expertise, but making sure that also this is the Economist brand as well, and people come to us because it's a team project. And yes, there might be a personality or a face at the front of it, but it's what The Economist has to offer that's really showcasing that.
I've forgotten the question.
About having an existing profile first. I mean, for you, I guess that's
I see. Yeah, I think we kind of filled out the portfolio in a variety of ways, right? So there's, the magazine is broken down into sections. So each section kind of has its own newsletter at this point. Then the columnists are sort of slowly filling things out. And then we've got subject matter experts as well. So Shashank is the obvious example on defense, but there are others. So we sort of populated in a variety of different ways. I'm sure there are gaps still to fill. So I don't think there's one formula.
I think that it really depends on your aim for the newsletter, right? So if you've got a newsletter which is set up to send traffic to your website, probably doesn't need a huge personality writing that, because that's not its aim. If it's something that you want to add that's a part of, we have a 2-tier subscription. So we have a premium subscription, and we need to make sure that premium subscription is extremely valuable. So the premium newsletters need to be that bespoke exclusive content, real value add, and those are pretty much all personality-led newsletters. But that doesn't mean that's the only thing that we need, and it doesn't mean that that's the only thing that the portfolio needs. I also think that, Stephen Bush, when he came to the FT, we specifically wanted to give him a politics newsletter. That was one of the reasons we got him, and I was delighted. And I remember being told by the managing editor and, being ecstatic that he was coming. But I don't think you have to have someone with expertise, as somebody said before, if they are writing about an area which they need to be expert in. But if they're writing a general newsletter, then I don't think they do. And I think you can build up their personality. I've certainly been involved in places where a newsletter has become very successful that was written by a writer that wasn't well known before, particularly they were a reporter at a publication. And I think that's great as well. And I was waiting for you to ask me what happens if somebody leaves at some point. And I would agree actually with this is, I would say, less of a problem for the FT, because a lot of people come to us because we're the FT and they like our brand, and they also like the newsletter brand quite often. So, when Stephen's on holiday, we have lots of people who fill in and write that newsletter extremely well. They don't write it like Stephen, but, George Parker, Lucy Fisher, I mean, these are really good political experts. And, Rob has a team writing Unhedged with him. So I'm much less worried about that, because if you're paying for an FT subscription, you might go off and follow a newsletter writer who leaves and does his own newsletter, but you're unlikely to cancel your FT subscription because you're unlikely to be reading the FT for one person alone. It has been done. Oliver Darcy's done it incredibly successfully after leaving CNN and setting up Status. And obviously Paul Krugman's got a very successful newsletter. We know a lot of people there are lots of examples of this, but I think I've experienced, I would say, in the last 15 years of my career, and not just in newsletters, people being worried about building up personalities as big personalities at a publisher in case they leave. And I just think that's very short-sighted. Build them up, they'll probably stay because they'll like the fact that you've built them up. And if they leave, you'll build someone else up. I mean, it's not that difficult. We all know people who've come through in the last few years who you didn't know 5-10 years ago. So I think people worry too much about that needlessly.
So do you, kind of on your point about having an FT subscription, perhaps that's more of a threat for a free-to-air publisher that wouldn't, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is more of a threat to someone who can just leave. There's been examples, there are many examples. Someone's written a newsletter for a publication that's free, and they've left and successful, and they've left and set up their own, and they've charged not that much and actually become very successful. And I do think that is a danger, but I also think you can't, whilst they were doing that for you, they were successful. So, you can do that with somebody else, because people will always be interested in your newsletter on politics or Liverpool Football Club or the economy. They're not going to leave your publication unless your publication was only built around that one person. They were like the voice of that. Then that is dangerous if you only have one big name. So I would say build up more.
Yeah, nice. That and Dominic, do you have anything to add on that? Because that kind of working with your newsletter
in
writers.
Terms of being worried about if people leave.
Yeah,
is that,
basically, yeah.
I feel like I've kind of mentioned it, but basically, I believe, although you look at when you read Andrews, Bartleby, or Shashank's The War Room, the quality of the writing is brilliant. Sorry, that there's definitely a plug there, but they are really good newsletters, and the quality and attention and humor they are able to put into the writing is brilliant. And of course, on paper, you might be worried that the talent that these writers have, what does this mean for The Economist? But The Economist offers so much as well to them. And Andrew, as we've mentioned, is the person that's often going into the unbox at the moment, responding to subscribers. But often, in other examples, the reporters and correspondents are under the pump, are doing so much, and it requires a team behind that face to make sure the newsletter's functioning properly. So as much as perhaps, say, someone might like to set up by themselves, I like to think that the team behind the Economist make the reach and the quality of that newsletter so much better than it would be if they were by themselves.
I'm just going to add something briefly to that, because I would agree. And I also think it's difficult writing a newsletter. It's difficult writing a newsletter every day. And what we at the FT and you at The Economist and other people here can offer is the backup, the admin, the tech support, the cover when you're on holiday, all those kinds of things that we help you to deal with. If you go off by yourself, you're dealing with all of them yourself. And that is really difficult and really stressful. And that's what I think people appreciate when they're at a big publication, that they have that support and backup.
This is really disappointing. I thought there was going to be a bidding war breaking out for me. So I think just a few things. So on personality, the way we do things. So the newsletter, Bartleby, which is the name of the column. So we're very specifically not using a name. And we have a sort of Doctor Who process where someone will leave the column, new writer comes in. But as far as the subscribers are concerned, same column, same topic. So that protects us. For us, I think the issue is it's less about people leaving. It's more The Economist has a single voice. And if you have a sort of collection of individuals, what does that do to the sense of a really developed collective voice? How much do you kind of get? How good is it to understand the level of disagreement that goes into some of the lines that we come up with? So that's what we're thinking about more than people sort of leaving. And then one last thought on personality. You can also convey the personality of an institution or a publication as well as an individual. So one of our biggest newsletters is called Cover Story. That tells the story of every week's magazine cover, the ideas that we discarded and how we got to the final one. And although it's sent from the desk of the editor, really it's about showcasing the inside of sort of how the institution thinks and the personality of the publication as a whole.
Great. Yeah, please see.
Andrew mentioned Cover Story, and I just wanted to say that was like a really good example of the team effort and dynamic that goes into the work of newsletters, and seeing content opportunities that might present themselves. The Economist also produce an annual of the best covers once the year is concluded, and we saw that as an opportunity to directly communicate with our subscribers and ask them to design their own covers themselves. And I think that was a really good example of where we had hundreds of people send in examples. I think it was on weight loss drugs, the cover that week. We had lots of people subscribe, and then we had a polling function that then enabled people to vote on their favorite of the subscribers' covers that they designed. So I just wanted to add that in terms of what Cover Story offers. That was another example.
Yeah, so you can be a bit more interactive as well. Nice. And maybe another one for Sarah, which might go on to the others as well. But basically, you're kind of talking about it being a team effort, basically. But to what extent do you use the personalities, the people at the front and center of the newsletter to do marketing for it as well?
Oh, we use them. I think that's the implicit part of the deal. If we want to send out a marketing email because, it's the US election, then we'll get the person who writes the US newsletter to write that. And it's still editorial, but it will have something on the end saying, sign up for my newsletter. And if we have events, we would want the people from the newsletters there to talk about their newsletter, because then that's a very nice virtuous circle where, you're hearing them talk about their expertise and then you think, I should sign up for their newsletter. So, but I think they know that, we have not dragged anyone kicking and screaming to write a newsletter. I would never want to give someone a newsletter if they didn't want to do it. So they all want to do it, and they see the awareness they get. Peter Foster would say to me, and he's just moved on from our State of Britain newsletter, but he wrote originally was the Brexit newsletter, and he would say he would walk into places with government ministers or people in the civil service, and they would say, I've just read your newsletter, and it led to a book deal, and it led to all sorts of things. I mean, he's a really good journalist, but he saw the benefits of it. And I think a lot of them do. And they also really enjoy that interacting with readers. You just don't get that as a reporter. And I also don't think everyone can write a newsletter. I think there are some reporters who just cannot get their head round using word I. This is what I think, and they shouldn't be given them, and there should be, you should be careful who gets a newsletter, who's going to put the time in regularly, and who is going to want to respond to people knowing them better and be able to drop in things that reveal stuff about them. So yeah, we do use them, but I wouldn't say we're using them. It's a kind of mutual thing that they want to promote their newsletter and we want them to promote it. And, it's good for all of us, really. Certainly good for the FT, but I would say it's good for them as well. They enjoy it. I can't think of anyone who writes a newsletter for us, and I'd be really sad if this was the case, who doesn't enjoy writing it. They enjoy it. It's really good fun. It's a great thing to have a newsletter. I've got one of the guys in the room, Jonathan, who writes the Week Ahead every week, and he writes it really well. It does really well on metrics and the reader survey, and he enjoys responding to the people who write into him.
Dominic, what's your experience been like, kind of getting everyone in the Economist newsroom on board with the newsletters as you've been growing them?
I think it's been very smooth. Everyone at The Economist is behind the mission and sees the value of newsletters. They play a very integral part, I'd say, now at The Economist. And just we have, as one example, Aaron, who is the head of newsletters, brilliant at his job. But he basically does special sessions within The Economist, telling people about inbox journalism and how to write for newsletters. And everybody's learning and growing within the organization and becoming better at writing in that style. And it's great to see. And people see the value of what newsletters, while they might not individually subscribe to The Economist for, say, a particular newsletter, our brilliant audience and data team have also discovered that if they subscribe to these newsletters, they're more likely to renew their subscription. So it basically shows the depth and quality of the experience that you can have at The Economist, not by following along on the app, looking at the website, but also subscribing to the newsletters that you really enjoy, and adding to the experience of getting that quality journalism that is delivered not just on the app, not just in print, but also in newsletters as well.
Should we see if there are any questions from the audience? I think we've got a few minutes left. Is there anyone? Charlotte has a mic for you, if so. If not, there's one. There is one.
Wonderful.
Hi. I was just wondering, especially with those strong personality-led or voice-led newsletters, how do you handle things like illness or unexpected leave?
Try not to panic, I think, is the first thing. Yeah, expected leave is fine because we just arranged cover for whoever it is. I think if it was literally on the day and the newsletter was supposed to go out in a few hours, we probably would just not send it, and then we would put a note in the next one saying, that we're sorry. It hasn't really happened. I'm just trying to think back. It hasn't really happened to us. We usually manage to scramble some kind of cover. If it was a newsletter with a regular editor, we would probably do some kind of links version of, here are the best articles on this topic today. Sorry, this person's ill. Jonathan, who I mentioned, has certainly covered before on City Bulletin, which he edits and written it when we've had to do that. So we would try to keep it going. We're lucky because we've got a big staff and we've got sort of editors editing all our newsletters. But if it was very late and we couldn't do it, we just wouldn't do it. But we would try our best to get out something, but with an explanation. And that's the whole thing about the nice relationships with the readers. They're fine with it if they're told what's going on. We would try and tell them. But that doesn't mean I would suggest if you're not going to do anything, you send something out saying we're not doing anything. I think that's kind of pointless. I've seen that before. Try and still give something valuable or apologise the next day.
I have to say, I can see Sarah like building up a sweat at the thought of these unexpected absences. Can feel the panic from here.
Hopefully you can also plan ahead for these situations. Preparation does help in some examples. I can think of, we've got numerous backup writers. Say if something were to happen to Shashank, we know there are options to go to. That obviously isn't ideal, but we react and we'll often plan special editions that we can roll in and bring in on an earlier date if needed. So there's that preparation. But then I'd also say we're very fortuitous to work at an organization where the level of writing and ability, there's lots of people to call on in emergencies, and lots of different stories to tell. So if it's a defense newsletter, there's always something new and something different that we can report on and write.
Can I just go back to, I don't have anything to add to that, but the kind of like how you persuade writers to do newsletters, because I think there are definitely pockets of resistance, because, and it might be kind of just people being grumpy, but there is an opportunity cost there for reporters. And so I think it's really important to explain not just the sort of awareness benefits, but also what this is doing for the organization as a whole. So we have, I'm sure you've talked about this in other sessions, but if you can sort of demonstrate that there is an effect on acquisition, retention, and you can tie it into the overall mission, then it's much harder for people to say, look, I'm not going to play my part. So, I mean, it's both a personal and an institutional benefit, and I think that wins people over.
I totally agree with that, and we've done a lot of work, I'd say, since I started at the FT on showing the value of newsletters to the business, not just to the individual. But what I would say is we haven't had problems, interestingly, with individuals, but sometimes it is persuading the news desk to let that reporter have the time to write that newsletter. So I mentioned Peter Foster, he was given the time to write. I think it was only about half a day a week, but they knew that he wrote his newsletter. Those are sometimes the people you have to persuade if you're using a reporter that you need some of their time.
Very good. Well, thank you to our wonderful panel, Charlotte. Andrew, who I'm a bit worried, you referred to The Economist as a magazine. Isn't that a sackable offence of The Economist?
Absolutely not.
Oh, wow. Breaking news here. And Sarah and Dominic, thank you so much, guys. Fantastic session.
Thanks once again to Charlotte, Andrew, Dominic and Sarah for joining us on stage at the summits. We've written up the key learnings from pretty much all of the sessions now, and they are live on our website, voices.media, and in our newsletter. You can find that as well at voices.media. And of course, once again, thank you so much to Percendo and Sino. They are not just incredibly dedicated to making sure that publishers are well set up for the publishing strategies of today, they are also so keen to boost the voices of unheard people within the industry. So for more information about our incredible sponsors, please do head over to publishersummits.com. We are going to be back next week with another session from the Publisher Summits, but until then, thank you so much for listening. Please do share it if you enjoyed it, and goodbye.